Hello. I wanted to bring this video series to life today. I've been talking about God and the government for some time, and I want you to have a modern understanding of certain issues related to this country so that you can see for yourself how God operates through His people, how He wants to operate through His people, and why it's so necessary for His people to be involved in government. I'm not talking about you running for public office or walking around, advocating the overthrow of the government. And I'm not talking about disobeying laws. I'm talking about your civil duties, your civic duties as a citizen of the United States of America. And I'm talking to you about getting an understanding of why it's so important that the church has a voice in modern day politics. Also, I'm going to try and break down for you why the church doesn't have as strong a voice in politics as it used to. And I'm not talking about the ineffective nature of prayer, because prayer is very effective when it's done properly. But what prayer can be effective without information? What prayer can be effective without involvement? God judged Israel for its sins because its leadership constantly made mistakes and constantly made choices that led Israel down the path of sin. And we want to discuss today how Israel could have stopped that, could have changed the judgments of God, how we as American citizens can change the judgments of God, how we are responsible for many of the things that are happening in this country and must be responsible as citizens of a republic, a United States of America, which has never been seen on this planet before and may never be seen again. I'm going to be using for my information the Declaration of Independence and also the Constitution of the United States. These videos will be broken down, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, and the amendments of the United States Constitution. We're going to be discussing all of the different parts and parcels of the articles and what they mean, the three branches of government, and how Christians are involved. And I'm taking a lot of my notes and information from studies that I've made over years. And I want to give you a modern day perspective on how important these documents really are to you as a citizen, to you as a church member, as a community involved leader, as a community involved citizen of this republic. I'm going to give you a little background today dealing with this first video, which I would almost call a modern perspective of the Declaration of Independence. As a practical matter, the Declaration of Independence, adopted by Congress on July 4, 1776, publicly announced to the world the unanimous decision of the American colonies to declare themselves free and independent states, absolved from any allegiance to Great Britain. Yet it also is the definitive American statement of the conditions of legitimate political authority, the ends of government, and the sovereignty of the people. The argument of the Declaration is straightforward. Because all human beings are created free and equal, all legitimate political rule must be based on their consent. Because all human beings possess certain fundamental rights, the purpose of government is to secure these rights, not to erode them, not to chew them up, not to destroy them. And as I read this declaration and these statements to you, I want to bring to your foreground some thoughts about the modern political system and who might be involved in eroding these rights, bringing to your mind why I think there's a clear morality that needs to be adhered to and how you can find that morality and how God is involved in that morality, in fact must be involved. Since God is a God of justice and just nature, we must also be people of justice, and we must seek justice. And the way we do that is through civility, through our civil systems, and through the government. But if that government becomes uncivilized, if that government takes policies and programs that are no longer civilized to morality in the sense that it doesn't follow the basic human principle of freedom and hope and independent individual decision making, then we have to stand up and say something against that government. We have to take steps and be involved in that government. Although governments should not be changed for trivial reasons, the people in their collective capacity ultimately retain the right to alter or abolish government when it becomes destructive to these ends. It is in light of this statement of principle that after the extensive list of particular abuses suffered by the American colonies at the hands of a British king, that the representatives of the Continental Congress, with a, quote, firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, end quote, declared themselves to be free and independent. You begin to see with that statement that they relied heavily on God and his leadership, if not a total understanding of God's likeness or being. And I'm not going to delve into, which of the colonists were this or that, or how they lived their individual lives. I'm not doing that. I will not play the devil's advocate. I will not bring up all of the issues. I'm simply going to present to you the declaration that they came up with, and I'm going to bring it to light in modern terms. More than 2 centuries later, it remains the oldest written national constitution in continuous use in the world. Since its ratification in 1789, the Constitution has secured fundamental rights, providing for an unprecedented degree of human flourishing, while at the same time upholding the rule of law. The Constitution wasn't actually written until 11 years after the Declaration of Independence. It took that long to come up with it. But there's a part of what we're going to deal with here that's going to immediately come to your mind. I'm going to read to you the oath of office. An individual except the president, elected or appointed to an office of honor or profit in the civil service or uniformed services, shall take the following oath. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear the faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservations or purpose of evasion, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God. I took this oath when I joined the Air Force in 1983, and I believe that this oath is essential to service in the government. Right now, there is a group of people attempting to cut, so help me God, from oaths being taken for certain committees. We are watching people take the oath on the Quran, on dictionaries, on books of law, on whatever they choose, and eliminating, so help me God, from that oath, which means that they don't want God's affirmation or support, which means they're eliminating God from government. And you and I as a church member, we must not allow that to happen. We cannot stand by and watch these individuals who have personal material views that definitely cut against the grain, if you will, of the fundamental beliefs of the Constitution and the Republic of the United States. We are allowing people in whose personal faith, whose personal ideology lines up with that of our enemies. Our enemies are seeking to destroy us both from within and without, and we've got to be aware that this oath of office is essential and necessary. Let's get into the declaration. In Congress, July 4, 1776, this is the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the law of nature and nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Here's what makes us declare independence from Great Britain. Here's what they're saying, and they're acknowledging God immediately within it. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now you can say, yes, but some of them were slave owners and didn't see human beings on equal terms that way. I agree, which is why the 13th Amendment of the Constitution exists, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, and we're going to get into those. Let's deal only with the Declaration today. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. In other words, if you're in something long enough, you can become used to it, and when you're used to it, you're even willing to suffer under it than to see it changed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, and evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future safety. We're talking about the deep state today. You're seeing a cabal of people that are looking to destroy the Electoral College, to eliminate the Constitution, to once and for all change and fundamentally transform the United States of America. Such has been the patient suffering of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain, in fact the very history of Congress itself and various other aspects of the government today, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over the states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused to his assent to law, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended he has utterly neglected to attend them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. What we're talking about is the endless hearings that are taking place in Congress, tying you up and keeping you from hearing the truth. We're talking about certain governments in this state's system setting up other systems which keep you from being represented when they can just arbitrarily give licenses to illegal immigration, to allow them to vote in state systems without making them not the citizens of the country, simply giving them an ID and allowing them to participate in what you rightfully deserve. It leads to tyranny. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. Again, endless hearings, classification of certain information that should be made known, that is made known through newspaper articles, reports. The public knows what's going on but can't prove it because the essential information is being kept away from us until we're so tired of it, we just say whatever and move on. Do you see the modern nature of this? He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, this is the King of Great Britain, but you can see a political party now representing these issues. After such disillusions, to cause others to be elected whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all dangers of invasion from without and convulsions from within. In other words, they've set it up so that certain states have a population that cannot be changed and a voting record that will not be changed. And you see it now that certain states are just given that they're going to be Democrat or Republican. They're just given that way. And the ones that are focused on that issue are working toward the end of changing within other states the voting rights. Right now, a movement is underway to give your electoral vote to a larger state, to a collective, who will then throw their vote behind whoever wins the popular vote, because the Electoral College is attempting to be destroyed. They're attempting to destroy the Electoral College, which is essential to this republic because it keeps one city-state from ruling the world. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for the purpose obstructing the laws and naturalization of foreigners refusing to pass others to encourage their migration hither. You see that happening? And raising the conditions of the new appropriation of lands. Talk about the Bundys and what happened to them out west when the United States government took a portion of their land for no other reason than to create a conflict, an armed conflict, by which federal officers went in armed and shot private citizens, arrested them. Those citizens now have been released and they're actually suing the government again for wrongful imprisonment. We've seen this happening. And who's involved in this? He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. Do you see this happening in the Ninth Circuit, the D.C. Circuit Court, other courts that are essentially entrenched in a particular political party's leanings? He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substances. All these czars that have been created, all these executive orders that have been created and have to be abolished by other executive orders. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. Go to Colorado and look at the 4,000 armed Army veterans that have been put together in a battalion. Check it out. He has effected to render the military independent and superior to the civil power by firing certain generals and putting other generals in place. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution, the United Nations, and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by mock trial. Do you see what happens when certain individuals of a certain faith are brought into trial? From punishment for any murders which they may have commit on the inhabitants of these states. Do you see anything happening with the catch and release programs? Have you ever heard of that? How many American citizens have been murdered by illegal immigrants, an armed mob that have come in here and killed our citizens and faced mock trials? Just let them go, put them back, let them back in the States 8, 9, 10 times to murder, rape, and pillage again. For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent. Maine's about to do that, thank you very much. For depriving us, in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas, so to be tried by for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, altering fundamentally the forms of our government, the deep state. Do you understand what I'm talking about? The Electoral College, the attempts to destroy and abolish it without amending the Constitution, simply rendering it invalid by use of these great states, cooperatives. They're going to throw their Electoral College votes into California, for example. And California will then carry 8, 9, 10, 11 other states. And those electoral votes will overwhelm any others that are going to win. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries. Oh, now, come on. You're seeing this at our southern border every single day. He is transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country, to become the executioner of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their own hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us. Antifa, Black Lives Matter, the Muslim Brotherhood, CARE, and other organizations. Do you see this in modern times? Do you see what I'm talking about? And which political party, my friends, is consistently behind these things? And why? Doesn't it make you wonder? You see how far-reaching the Declaration of Independence was back then? 13 colonies becoming states, and now we are seeing this play out in our streets. Burning cities and cars, breaking into private businesses, the burning of universities. We're seeing it on every level. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages. Well, now they're simply known as Antifa and other organizations, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Infidels are infidels. In every stage of this oppression, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. When we sign petitions and when we go before our Congress, when we march, it is ignored. You look at those angel moms, and they are being ignored by our representation, our representatives. They're not our leaders. See, when they are called leaders by our news agencies, and we begin to refer to them as leaders, we forget that they are representatives hired by us, paid by us to do our bidding. They're no longer representatives when they're our leaders, my friend. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. And there's people arguing that Trump is like that right now. But who's really behind all of this? It's the deep state. It's a Democrat party. It's those people that are running freely and causing chaos. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by our legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We've gone to our state legislatures and said, listen, the federal government's overreaching. What are you going to do about it? And we've been ignored time and time again. Rhino, Republican in name only, though they have circumvented so many of our desires, and they have gone lockstep with their opponents in the political sphere to create things. We have to pass a law to see what's in it. Can you imagine? We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce to the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, friends in peace, friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions due in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of rights ought to be, free and independent states, and they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. How modern is this document now? It's so relevant to what's happening to us. And you say, okay, that sounds good, Pastor. Where's the church fit in? Well, again, going back to just one word, morality. In a moral world, in a world of moral justice, There must be a moral center, and that moral center must come from a centralized area. That moral center must be understood across the board. It must be a morality that can be evidenced and seen, can be understood and lived by everyone who is involved in it. We must see this opportunity before us as one of the church reaching out beyond its four walls, beyond its prayer circles, beyond its individual connection to each other, and into the sphere of political influence. We must once again rise up and bring morality to the foreground in this immoral age. Planned Parenthood is given taxpayer money. In fact, until just recently, until an executive order denying this, we were paying for foreign abortions taking place on other soil. We were paying for it to the tune of billions. 150 billion, I think, was the figure. But an executive order has stopped that. And we have eliminated $60 billion in taxpayer funds to Planned Parenthood. Why is this important? Because Planned Parenthood was selling our human bodies, selling babies and their blood and their organs to private organizations for research, to create injections for the rich and famous in Hollywood. This is real stuff. I'm not going to do any more research for you. I'm going to ask you to do your own research. See what it means to give up our taxpayer money to an organization that sells humanity for the purposes of elongating life. Adonis, blood, and tiger, DNA. We must be involved in the political issues of our day because we share the life of a living God who is himself just and who seeks justice among humans. God judged Israel because its leadership made it to sin, but the people could have done something about that. From Moses, Joseph, Samuel, David, Solomon, to Jesus, Peter, and Paul, men of God have always been involved in politics. We have always gone before the leadership of this world to tell them that the God of this world is the God that rules this world, and that God himself will have sovereignty over this world. And while the little god of this world, the devil, may rise in power, it is ultimately God himself who will judge this world and judge us and our involvement in this world. We are not of this world, but we are in this world, my friend. But the church has pulled away, has become silent, has become complicit in its silence to the activities of a political party who is now seeking to depose a duly elected president by virtue of its movements, by clandestine meetings, by classified operation with, by the way, British spies who have come into our country and created a false document that has incorrectly levied before us this confusing mess of accusations that have no basis in fact and yet are still propagated by our media. It's you, my friend, it's you who are going to make the difference in this. You and I are going to be the ones to rise up as Christian people and say enough. Enough. The United States of America was founded on Christian principle, divine protection, and it's going to have divine protection in this day and age. God the Father executes justice for the oppressed. He gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets the prisoners free. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord watches over the sojourner. He upholds the widow and the fatherless, according to Psalms 146. God the Father expects his children to be involved in political action because he is involved. So this is phase 1, the Declaration of Independence. I'm going to be going into phase 2 now, more heavily focused on Christianity, on the scriptures that prove our involvement is necessary. And I'm going to be giving you the Constitution of the United States, Article 1, which is going to deal with the Senate, the Congress of the United States of America and its body. And I'm going to use scripture to prove to you how we can pray more effectively. Listen, the fervent effectual prayer of a righteous man availeth much. But how can you fervently, effectually pray for things you're not involved in, for things you don't care about, and for things you're not seeing? If you don't know, you can't pray. So with that, I'm going to leave you. Let's just join together and hope this becomes something good. I see it being 4 and 5 parts as we go to Article 1 and break that down, Article 2, all the way through all of the Articles, 6, 7, all of the Articles of the Constitution, and then the amendments, all the way up to the 20 some amendments that are in the Constitution. And I want you to know that as we break these down, I'm going to be involving you in Scripture, and you're going to see from a PhD's point of view, from a layman's point of view, how we can affect this government and change the world again. God bless you. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please share it with your friends. Come to our YouTube channel if you'd like to, Shepherd's Flock Apostolic Pentecostal Church, and see God and the government in action.